I'm going to start to record the meeting, and I will. So thanks for joining us today. So for new members, welcome. I believe I heard through the grapevine that Stephanie and Sam and Sherry are all new members. We're really thrilled. That, you know, the history of the eClub has been that we've been off to a bit of a rocky start in the past years, but we've really found our niche. I think we're pretty excited about it. For those who are not members, just a reminder that you can become a formal member of our eClub, monthly at $25 a month or annually discounted to $270. So we would love to have you. Sorry, now I'm having trouble with my Zoom. There we go. Our website is rotaryclub5960.org, and the membership link is right up at the top. Paul, you had asked for the link. It's tinyurl.com/eClub-donation. And if you are a member of a regular club, I think there's few of you, you can become a supporting eClub friend for $100 a year. Visit as often as you'd like, unlimited makeup, support a nice, new, thriving club, and we certainly appreciate that. And all of that can be done, membership, anything, or donations at tinyurl.com/eClub-donation. So one announcement from Paul is that the Rochester Rotary e-meeting is being held tomorrow, and they're interviewing, or as their guest speaker, our 3 returned exchange students from last year, Freddie, Hannah, and Lily. Anyone is welcome. So it's tomorrow at noon. And I do have, once Karen starts to speak, I'll copy the Zoom information into the chat if anyone is interested in attending that meeting. Next week's speaker is Frederico Malab from Brazil. He runs a company. Many of us on the call know him quite well. He's very active in youth exchange, but as a company who does tours for exchange students. So he's the guy who puts on, from Terra Brazil Tourism, who would put on our equivalent of the East Coast trip, where all of the inbound exchange students in Brazil or other countries in South America, or he's now expanded to North America, get together and go on this, 2-week trip, 3-week trip, 1-month trip as part of their exchange. Should be a really interesting interview, and he's just a really, really great guy. So please do join us next week. And right on to today's speaker. Karen was not bound to Sweden, 7374, as part of the Minnesota District Court system, and we're just really thrilled to have you here. So I am going to reshare your presentation, and
all right. Well, should I start then, John?
Please do start, and welcome. Thank you again for being here.
Great. Thanks. Thank you so much, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you for the invitation to be here today. I had a chuckle with my husband before we got started. I want you all to know that I put on a dress. It's the second time I've had a dress on, I think, since the quarantine began. I even put on mascara and lipstick. And so I am truly the embodiment, the personification of the slogan, all dressed up and nowhere to go.
So happy we could help. Thank you.
So thank you for that. My name is Karen Asphaug, and I was invited to speak here today about my experiences as an exchange student and how they have influenced me over the course of the last many years. As I thought about the topic, I realized that, and I've learned that some experiences, no matter how distant in time, become part of our DNA, and they are forever referred to. We always refer to them in the present tense. So for example, my brother, who is 63 years old, is an Eagle Scout. My sons, who are in their 30s, they are Eagle Scouts. You never say, I was an Eagle Scout. You are an Eagle Scout, no matter how many years past your scouting experience. My parents passed away, but I am a daughter. And I am Rotex. My exchange year was 1972-73. I spent my year in the city of Huskvarna, Sweden. And maybe you could put up the map, John. You'll note that there is no Huskvarna on the map. And that's because Huskvarna doesn't exist any longer. Huskvarna was incorporated into the larger neighboring municipality of Jönköping, Sweden. And you can see that this is a town in southern Sweden. It's on the southern shore of Lake Vättern, which is the second largest lake in Sweden and the sixth largest lake in Europe. And it's an incredibly beautiful environment. So you may have heard of Huskvarna, or as we say in Minnesota, Husqvarna, because the company Husqvarna or Husqvarna is a manufacturer, an internationally renowned manufacturer of chainsaws and implements. And it's a constant laugh in this house that somehow in Minnesota we have injected an extra syllable. If you look up the company, there is no middle syllable of an A. It is not Husqvarna, but that's what we call it in Minnesota anyhow. So that's where I spent my exchange year. My exchange year differed from that of many others in that I was sent to live with a host family that did not want to host a student. The family had 3 daughters. The oldest had applied to be a Rotary Exchange student and was accepted to spend a year in New Jersey. As a condition of being selected, however, the family was obligated to take an inbound student and to take that student for the entire year because there was a shortage of host families. So I arrived into a home in which I was not welcomed. And the family was in the throes of a crisis. The father, who was a physician, was rarely home. And when he was, he seemed terribly bewildered to be there. The mother was very angry. She was a chain smoker, and she rarely spoke to me or to her 2 younger daughters. It was a very unhappy family. And this came as a tremendous shock to me. I was then a young 17-year-old. I grew up in a happy home, a home that was filled with laughter and lots of conversation and companionship. And this was before the era of email, Skype, and easy communications. I felt terribly alone. I had no support from the local Rotary Club. And my mother's weekly letters, my mother was faithful as far as writing me. And she wrote a letter to me every week. And those weekly letters from my mother back in Minnesota was my lifeline to a much happier life. At Christmas time, another family, not Rotarians, took me into their home. Their son was a school friend of mine, and he told his mother what was happening in this house. She, in turn, told me to pack my bags. I mean, literally, go home, pack your bags. I will be there in 2 hours to pick you up. And that's exactly what I did. I went and packed my bags and moved into my friend's home. And my new host mother took care of the rest. The Rotary Club wasn't happy, but my new host mom convinced the club of the necessity for the move. And the rest of my exchange year was exactly the type of year that I had hoped for and that we want our exchange students to have. Sadly, when I returned home to Minnesota from Sweden, I learned that my first host parents had separated, and in the midst of the divorce, my host father took his own life. So it was a tragic situation, and one that no exchange student should ever have been placed in. Notwithstanding that, I look back on the experiences that I had in that year and how they have influenced my life in an overwhelmingly positive way. I'm not sure if is Greg on the line now? Did he join us by any chance?
Yes, he did.
Greg is on the line? Good.
Yes.
Okay, good. Because he's about to hear me kind of practice his eulogy here. When I went through the selection process at age 16, I was a high school junior then, I met my first Rotex. There was this guy. He was full of high energy, he was enthusiastic, he was fully engaged, and he had this mop of long, curly, black hair. And his name was Greg White. I arrived in Husqvarna to be met by many who asked, "Do you know Greg White?" It turns out that Greg spent his exchange year in the very same town 3 years earlier. Greg the legend. So I returned home, I enrolled at the University of Minnesota, and on my very first day and in my very first class, a class of Swedish literature, I walked in nervously, and who rose to greet me? Well, you know the answer. It was Greg White. And from that day forward, we were companions, friends, and confidants. Greg recruited me to join Rotex, and there I found a group of kindred spirits and forged friendships that are over 40 years in duration. Greg and I are family to each other. He is the godfather to my 3 sons. They and my grandchildren call him Uncle Greg. And I call the gift of our connection and friendship the single best thing that came from my exchange year. So there you go, Greg. You just heard part of your eulogy. Now, like so many other Rotex, my exchange year developed my identity as a global citizen. My path, like most Rotex, has been an evolution. Mine was slightly different, however, because I'm a firstborn American. My parents were from 2 different countries. They met in a third, and they came to the United States 4 months before I was born. And so I traveled internationally extensively with my family, primarily to visit my grandparents and other family members. My mother had been an exchange student 3 times. As a teenage girl, she spent 3 summers on summer youth exchanges to Italy, the Netherlands, and Norway. And she was from a working class British family. So it was very, very unusual for her and in that time. As I said, my parents came from 2 different countries. When we went back to Europe to visit my grandparents, when I was, I think, 4 or 5 years old, my brother and I had been born in the United States, so we were on American passports. My mother was a British passport holder, my father a Norwegian passport holder. We came to customs when we landed, and the customs agent looked at the 4 of us with 3 different passports and said, "Is this a family?" I mean, it was the only family I knew. I realize now this was not the typical experience. In my family of origin, we hosted exchange students. And my mother would call the University of Minnesota and say, "Are there any international students who don't have a place to go for Thanksgiving or Easter or Christmas?" And we often had international students from the university in our home. And we hosted a student from Brazil, we hosted a student from Japan. I was an exchange student to Sweden, my brother was an exchange student to Argentina. So all of these experiences contributed to my identity as a global citizen. My exchange year led directly to my college major, which was Scandinavian language and literature, and indirectly to what became my career and what in fact has been the call on my life, and that is the law, my legal career. I wanted to go to graduate school when I graduated from college, and I intended to apply to a graduate program in Scandinavian language and literature. I wanted to earn a PhD in Swedish and to teach. My very tolerant and very practical father listened to my plans and in no uncertain terms dissuaded me from them. I recall something along the lines of, "I'm not going to pay for you to become the best conversationalist at the cocktail party." He saw no good that could come from a PhD in Swedish. So he encouraged me to apply to law school. I think he also pointed out to me I was good at arguing. And so he encouraged me to apply to law school. And I truly believe that I was the most reluctant 1L in the history of William Mitchell College of Law. I went to please my father. I was very, very unhappy about the decision, but I was obedient. And of course, he was a wise father who knew his daughter. My talents, as I've said, I was a good arguer, and my passion for social justice aligned in this career. I worked as a prosecutor in the Dakota County Attorney's Office for 12 and a half years, and I became a judge in 1995. I was appointed to the First District Bench, chambered in Dakota County in 1995. I was appointed by Governor Arne Carlson. My career as a judge will span 25 years. My anniversary is this June. I went on senior status this January, which means that I am no longer managing a full caseload, and I'm now working about 3 days a month, which is just perfect. As I say, I work often enough so that I remember how to log on to the computer. So the lessons that I learned as an exchange student, the lessons of tolerance, of understanding that the world is not black and white, of understanding the immigrant and expat experience, of the difficulties of communication in another language, and of navigating a different culture and society have served me well in the law. We serve a very large immigrant community in our courts. We have full-time interpreters on staff. In my career, there certainly has been one day, a single day, when I didn't need the services of an interpreter. But I don't think I can think of 2 consecutive days when I didn't use the services of an interpreter in my work, because we serve such a large immigrant community. Which leads me to Kosovo. From 1991 to 2001, a 10-year period following the death of Marshal Joseph Tito, ethnic conflict and wars of independence and ethnic cleansing tore apart the former Yugoslavia. The countries that eventually emerged are Slovenia, which was the first to go. Serbia let Slovenia go after a 10-day war. Then Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia emerged from the former Yugoslavia, Montenegro, Macedonia, and Kosovo. Now, to understand the Balkans, you must understand the role that religion plays in ethnic identity in that part of the world. To be a Slovenian or a Croatian means that you're Catholic. To be a Serbian, a Montenegrin, or a Macedonian, you are most likely Orthodox. To be Bosnian or to be a Kosovar means that you are Muslim. Kosovars are ethnic Albanians, and they like to consider themselves to be a part of Greater Albania, which consists of Albania and Kosovo. And they, as well as Bosnians, were targeted for ethnic cleansing by Slobodan Milosevic, who led Serb forces in a campaign of genocide, rape used as an instrument of war, and crimes against humanity. It's estimated that 140,000 souls lost their lives and 2.4 million people were displaced during the Balkan conflict, including over 800,000 people who were displaced in Kosovo. Part of those people became the diaspora who left and to Germany, Norway, primarily Germany, Norway, the US, and some were internally displaced. The war ended with US and NATO involvement, and the United Nations took over the administration of Kosovo, which had no functioning infrastructure and no government. The United Nations established a rule of law mission in Kosovo that included police, customs, courts, and civil administration. In 2008, the European Union took over the helm and established EULEX, E-U-L-E-X, EU for European Union, L-E-X, which is the Latin word for law. EULEX is the largest civilian mission in European Union history. I was asked to serve as a judge with EULEX, and I served in the criminal court. I was what they call the focal point judge, the chief judge of the criminal court in Pristina for 13 months in 2010 and 2011. I served on a team of 43 international judges. I was one of 2 Americans in the mission. And we were tasked with the responsibility of presiding over and adjudicating war crime cases, corruption cases, and cases that were simply too hot for local judges to handle. Kosovo is a small country, and much like in Minnesota, where we all, I mean, the 6 degrees of separation simply doesn't apply to Minnesota. I think everybody in Minnesota is connected to everybody else by about 2 degrees of separation. And it's true in Kosovo as well. And there were many cases that were simply too difficult for the local judges to handle. And they needed an international team to come in and handle those matters. I arrived in Kosovo on a Thursday, and my first day in court was on Monday. Now, I was an experienced American judge at that point. I walked into the courtroom on my first day, and I was astonished because I took the bench and looked around the courtroom. There were 3 defendants sitting literally on a wooden bench. And they were 3 Kosovo police officers, 3 local police officers who were charged with murder. And they, and it was an ethnic crime. And so it was a very high publicity case. And they were Kosovar Albanian police officers. I looked around the courtroom and I counted 17 security officers, all wearing full balaclavas. All you could see was, they were all in SWAT gear. And they were posted throughout the courtroom, 17. All I could see were their eyes. The balaclava covered their face. They were all in black jackets, SWAT gear. And they were all carrying high-powered, semi-automatic long guns, AK-47s. And I looked and I thought, where am I going to go if the shooting starts? I was quite anxious. I was quite anxious by this. And I thought, where will I go? And this courtroom was dilapidated, was definitely not state of the art. We have in our own courtrooms here in Minnesota, we have a bulletproof shield on the bench is bulletproof. So we would drop. No such thing. I realized that if the shooting started, it was all over. So then I could relax and do my job. Once I realized there is no security here, I could simply relax and get to work. But I sure knew I wasn't in Minnesota anymore. Kosovo has adopted a continental code. It is a completely different legal system than what we have in the United States. Our legal system is based on the common law, and it is a system that we share with Britain. And Kosovo is a continental code-based system. So I was plunged into a legal system with very different procedural rules, with cumbersome and inefficient hearings and cultural values that were unfamiliar to me. A courthouse that was uncomfortable at best. Sometimes there was water, sometimes not, often not. Turkish toilets, it was chaotic, it lacked proper security, and there were lots and lots of people carrying high-powered long guns in the building. What's not to love? So I went from working in a highly supported, comfortable, predictable, efficient court system with reliable technology and security in which I had confidence to chaos. It was complete chaos. My American notions of managing a caseload and managing a courtroom did not sync with a system that had only recently emerged from the shackles of socialism. And yet, during my term in Kosovo, I learned again and again and again the importance of the ideals of America, the ideals of American justice, of American get-it-done mentality, and how important those ideals are to those seeking to establish a new democracy. I also learned again and again, no matter the difference in laws and procedures, at the end of the day, people look to the courts for an orderly, peaceful resolution to society's conflicts. That the law is designed to protect all that we hold dear, our families, our homes, our businesses, our liberties. And that is equally true in an emerging state like Kosovo, as it is in the United States. And so, John, I wonder if we can work through some of the Kosovo slides. The first slide is that is of me in my office with the flag of the European Union. And so every person in the mission had the little flag of the EU on our desk. And so that is the flag of the European Union, which you see, for those of you who have traveled in Europe, you see the EU flag everywhere. And we certainly saw it a lot in Kosovo. We can move to the next slide. This was the sign on the outside of the courthouse that I worked in, and it is written in 3 languages. And you can see the sign, well, and the languages are, the first line, Jikata, that is Albanian. The next language is Serbian. The third language is English. Pristina, with the 2 E's, is how it's spelled in Albanian. And the second way is Serbian. We had 3 official languages of our court: Albanian, Serbian, and English. And everything was translated into all 3 languages. And so we had interpreters at all times translating into all 3 languages, and all of our orders and our decisions were, I wrote in, all the judges wrote in English, and then they were all translated into Albanian and Serbian when they were filed. You can move to the next slide, John, if you would. I want to thank John for helping me do this. So this was the courthouse in which I worked. And as you can see, it is not a lovely place. It is very different from an American courthouse. One of the cases I presided over while I was there was a bombing of this courthouse. The bombing had happened before I arrived. And on the panel, there were, we were 2 international and 1 Albanian, 1 Kosovar judge. When you hear me say Albanian, I'm referring to a Kosovar. So we were two internationals, I believe myself and an Italian, and then a Kosovar judge. And we convicted, there are no juries, it's a 3-judge panel, and we found that this man had, in fact, he used a rocket propel grenade launcher and bombed the courthouse, blew a big hole in the building. And we convicted him, and the Albanian judge took the position that he had learned his lesson, and he shouldn't go to prison for this. That there should not be any punishment, no prison sentence, because he wouldn't do it again. And I felt very, very strongly about this case, that the importance of the safety and security of the courthouse and of the rule of law, that this man absolutely had to go to prison once we had adjudicated him to be guilty. And in fact, we did sentence him to, I think, 7 years in prison. But the Albanian judge was reluctant to sign the order because he knew his name would be on it. And I realized then how vulnerable the judges are. You know, Sam, you were in Italy, and you know how vulnerable the Italian judges were at one point in history on the mafia cases. I mean, judges were killed, they were murdered for doing their work. And we have this luxury in the United States, in Britain, in France, in Western Europe. We have this luxury of being able to do our work without fear, without favor. And it is part of our DNA as a judge to decide our cases, to adjudicate our cases without fear or favor. And the Albanian judges did not have that luxury. They did not have that privilege. So we can move on to the next slide, if you would. I don't know if you recognize this man. The scale on this is just awful. But that's Bill Clinton. And there is a major thoroughfare in Pristina called Bill Clinton Boulevard. There's also a George Bush Boulevard. And George Bush and Bill Clinton were the 2 American presidents who involved NATO, who involved the United States in securing the end of the Balkan conflict. And they are revered. Now, on the back, on the building, there is some graffiti that says, "No negotiation, self-determination." And in other words, no negotiation with Serbia. The Kosovars did not want to negotiate whatsoever. And so anyhow, this is Bill Clinton on Bill Clinton Boulevard. We can go to the next slide. This is a street scene, a very typical street scene in Pristina. Again, it's not such a lovely place. It is full of socialist era buildings that are that look like this. And you see lots of satellite dishes and laundry hung out to dry, and it's not inspiring architecture. But this is what neighborhoods look like in the city center of Pristina. We can go to the next slide. So the city is also full of greengrocers, and you see lots of little shops like this. And this picture I took in the wintertime. This was before the whole Eat Local movement came to the United States, but they sure got that in Kosovo. You can see it's wintertime because on the left we got a row of cabbages, and then some pumpkins or squash, and onions, and then not exotic fruits, but a variety of apples, and then more squash and cabbages. I see bananas are hanging in the window, so they came in on a plane. But it was very much, the food was actually delicious in Kosovo, very influenced by the Mediterranean, by Turkish food. And but it definitely was an eat local. And in the wintertime, you weren't eating pineapple, that's for sure. So we can move to the next slide. Life is hard in Kosovo. It's not a wealthy place. And this young man, I came to like him very much. I would walk past this, he had a little barbecue kiosk. And I walked past him every day on my way home from work, and I would often stop and buy a chicken from him. He only barbecued chickens. So those are raw chickens above, and then he'd put them on the skewer, on the spit, and roast his chickens. And they were delicious. And I often bought a chicken from him, but he was so hardworking. And I've got some photos I'm going to show you otherwise of the young Albanians. And like everyone, they want to work, they want to support their families, they want to make a living. So if we could turn to the next slide. I talked about the importance of religion in the conflict in the Balkans. Kosovo is primarily Muslim. It is overwhelmingly an Albanian population, overwhelmingly Muslim. But it is the site of several UNESCO World Heritage Serbian Orthodox sites, and the Patriarchate of the Serbian Orthodox Church is in Kosovo. It is in the town, in Serbian it's called Peš, in Albanian it's called Peja. And this monastery is called Gracanica. The nuns lived here. And this monastery, there is a replica, except it's actually a little bit larger, but there's a replica of this monastery called New Gracanica, and it's in Illinois. It's north of Chicago. And it is a beautiful, beautiful example of Byzantine Orthodox architecture. Outside of the grounds, and on the grounds is, the monastery, and as I said, the nuns live there, and there is a cemetery. It's a very peaceful, beautiful place, and it is surrounded by a wall with razor wire, and international troops are guarding it because the churches were burned. And this is, as I said, the churches were burned, the Serbs burned the churches, or excuse me, the Albanians burned the churches, and the Serbs burned the mosques. And this church is a very, very significant heritage site and a significant site for the Serbian Orthodox Church. So we could go to the next slide. This is inside that church, and you can see, looking up, the beautiful, beautiful old frescoes. The church probably dates from the 1300s, and all of the monasteries that are in Kosovo are date from about from 1100 to 1300, and they are beautiful works of art, beautiful Byzantine Orthodox architecture that are completely covered on the inside with gorgeous, gorgeous frescoes. So we can go to the next slide. And here we have a mosque, and there are beautiful mosques in Kosovo. And this mosque is in the town of Prizren. And what doesn't show up very well, you can see in the lower left-hand corner, there's a burger restaurant. You can see the word burger. And so there's an outdoor burger restaurant and this beautiful mosque. And then we can go to the next slide. And in Prizren, there is, and throughout Kosovo, there are hammams, the Turkish baths. Kosovo was part of the Ottoman Empire. This part of the world was part of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. And so you see lots of the old hammams. So this is very typical Ottoman architecture. And of course, you can see the minaret from a mosque. There are many, many, many mosques that have been built since the conflict because the Saudis have come in and donated a considerable amount of money to building mosques in Kosovo. So we can go to the next slide. This is, I showed you pictures and said a couple of times it's not a lovely place. And it is true that that Pristina, as I said, it lives on with the legacy of the socialist architecture. But this is what Kosovo looks like. It is a beautiful country with beautiful mountains, vineyards, agriculture. It's a lovely, lovely place. And I think that they are hoping for tourism. It is a landlocked country. It lacks a beach, or lacks a seaside. So that will hinder some of the tourism. Before it was getting rid of the landmines. During the conflict, the Serbs, it was not regular. We're not talking regular army. And the Albanian freedom fighters, not regular army. And so nobody knew where the mines were. And so they had to do a lot of work to try to get the mines out of the landscape. And so that has hindered tourism. That goes without saying. So maybe we can go to the next slide. I just want to show you the faces. I showed you the one face of the young man who had the chicken stand. And I wanted you to just see some of the faces of the young Albanians that I just came to love. And these two men are men that I adore. They were on my staff, and they were, they're young lawyers, and they supported me. They were staff attorneys for me. And their names, the one on the left is named Driton, and the one on the right is Murlan. And I stay in frequent contact with them. And then the next slide, please. And this young lady, her name is Tanira. She was my administrative assistant. And my husband and I have actually a trip booked to Kosovo in October, to Albania and Kosovo. And I'm not sure that we'll be able to go. We've got the tickets and we booked the trip, and I'll be very sad if I can't be giving these folks a big hug and a kiss come October. So I'm going to move a little bit off of Kosovo and talk about how my exchange year has affected my life on a personal level. Well, first of all, I love to travel. Right now we're all staying home, but I long for the day when we can be out in the world again. I've been fortunate to travel to 58 countries on 5 continents, and I keep a dream list of places to visit next. I especially enjoy traveling in disorganized places, which is the opposite of Sweden. Talk about a super organized place, and I kind of am drawn to disorganized places. I took a trip with the Eden Prairie and Burnsville Rotary Clubs to India, about 5 years ago. I've been back to India since, but that trip was sponsored by the Rotary Club. It was a 3-week cultural exchange. I saw a lot of latrines. Rotary's been busy building latrines in India, so it was the tour of Indian latrines. My husband and I, again, just on a personal level, how this exchange year has affected me. My husband and I spent the month of February volunteering at the refugee camp in Matamoros, Mexico, where 2,500 men, women, and children reside as they await for what they dream of. And what they dream of is a legal entry, to enter the United States legally. And they have applied for visas to the United States. They have been put in a holding pattern and a refugee camp. And it is it's an extraordinary place. People live in tents. It is a miserable life. And so we went to February and volunteered there for a month this year. Finally, my exchange year led me to become a host mom. And I have been the host mom to 3 exchange students. Rotary in Hastings does not have an active exchange program or doesn't participate, but AFS is the primary vehicle for youth exchange in Hastings. And so I've hosted 3 exchange students, each for 1 year. A boy from Austria, and then my Thai son, Nan, and my Russian son, Nick. Nan and Nick are sons to me, and they are forever members of my family. And so I wonder if we could go to the next slide. I went to Thailand in January, and this is a photo of Nan and me, and we had a reunion, and it was so wonderful to be together again. It was as if we saw each other a month ago. It was incredible. It was just so joyful. So here I am in Bangkok at a lovely restaurant with Nan. And then the next slide, if you would. The boy on the right, or the young man, is my Russian son, Nick. And the man in the middle is my husband, John, and the young man on the left is my son, Matthew. And Nick, we had a reunion 3 years ago in May, and Nick came to Minnesota, stayed with us, and this was up at our cabin, and the guys were putting in a paver sidewalk along the edge of the cabin. I just want to close by reading to you an email that I got on Mother's Day. If I can pull it up here quickly. This is from Nick's mother. Dear Karen, happy Mother's Day. Be healthy. We would like all your family to be healthy. Smile more, have only bright moments in your life. Don't give up if there are some troubles. Be just happy. I hope you'll have a nice rest of the day. All my family thanks you that you replaced Nick's mother while he was in America. Signed by the Holovan family. And Nick sent a separate email. Happy Mother's Day. Thank you for welcoming me into your family with open arms all those years ago. It was a pleasure for me to experience completely different lifestyle and customs at your house. I very appreciate all your effort that you invested in making me feel at home. Thank you a lot. Enjoy the lockdown as much as you can. Say hi to everyone. Best regards, Nick. I hear from Nick, I don't know, at least a half a dozen times during the year. It's to get emails like that. That's what this club is about. That's what this experience is about. It is a lifelong process. And what a legacy, what a gift I was given by being selected as a Rotary Exchange student all those years ago. So thank you.
Thanks so much. If everyone can take themselves off of mute for a round of applause. I just have to say, fabulous presentation and just so moving, Karen. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name. So really, really, really nice. Just what an experience, and the whole Kosovo. You know, what a time to be there, and what an important role you guys played. I'd like to open it up to some questions.
Well, Karen, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Karen.
I was going to ask Karen, what was the name of the other judge from America? I think I might know him.
Charlie Smith. He was from Iowa. Charles Smith.
Was there? That's not who I know. There was a gentleman who would come to the St. Croix Falls Rotary Club. It started with an
There
L.
were, over the years, there were other judges, Robert Carolyn from Minnesota, Dan Mabley from Minnesota, Phil Canning from Minnesota. There were about 5 of us over a span of years who served either with the United Nations. I was the first with the EU, and Phil Canning came after me, about 3 years after me, and served with the EU.
There was a gentleman who came to the St. Croix Falls, Taylor's Falls Rotary Club, and he had a passion for books and organized the collection of books in one of those shipping containers and brought it to Kosovo. And he was a judge. His name was Les or Lynn maybe.
Lynn Slattengren? Was it
Yeah.
Lynn Slattengren?
Yep.
He actually moved to Kosovo. He went as an American judge, and then when he retired, he took the Kosovo bar exam, and he went to Kosovo and is living in Pristina.
Okay, so he must have been from our area, because he would come to when he was back in the States, he'd come and he'd speak at our Rotary Club. And then one of his last things that he did was organize with 5960, our district, a book drive. And so he collected enough books to fill a shipping container and then paid to ship it down there for libraries that were destroyed in the war.
He was from the 10th Judicial District, which includes Washington County and Pine County. And so, which would be closer to your area.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's neat. The neat connection, small Rotary world.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kirk.
Sorry, Vicki.
You had a question?
Yeah.
Well, I've just been thinking, I wanted to ask you about the way that the Swedes approached the COVID threat to their communities. And is that something that you would have found predictable from knowing that culture? Because I think sometimes when you step back and you look at a culture, and you can sort of see or predict the way they might approach a dilemma. So has that surprised you, or is that what you would expect?
I think that the message that we've heard from Sweden, the message that has come across loud and clear is we share similar values, that we are a society that trusts our institutions, that we trust each other. And I think it's also very important to understand that this is a more homogeneous society than many, than some. But it is a society that has a high degree of trust and confidence in its institutions. And of course we have, and I want to be very, very cautious about what I say, but the trust and confidence in our institutions has eroded quite alarmingly. To many of it's quite alarming to us, to me, and to many of us.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen, I really enjoyed your presentation. Thanks for coming today. What kinds of cases do you see these days?
I sit on in the last several years, when I came back to Kosovo, I have to say, I listened to the presentation on re-entry a couple of weeks ago by Mr. White, and I was so struck by that because I experienced it as a returning exchange student, and I experienced it very dramatically when I came back from Kosovo. I had this experience in Kosovo that was so rich and so meaningful. The work was fascinating. I was taken in as, we had a fairly large group of Italians, and I was taken in as an honorary Italian. I told them that when I came home, I would attack like a disa and wave my hands around. But my friends were largely the Italian contingent, and it was very hard to leave that work. It was hard to leave Kosovo, and I came back and was quite, it was a hard landing. It was a hard landing. I was not content. I had been more than content in my work, and I was no longer. And I thought, if I have to preside over one more divorce case where they're quarreling over who gets the Sony PlayStation, I'm going to set up a garage sale on the courthouse steps, and we'll just sell it all. And you can I was very disillusioned with the work that I was doing. And I decided I needed to recommit and serve bigger, wider, deeper. And for me, that was getting involved in 2 specialty courts. I have been a presiding judge in our drug court, our drug treatment court, working with our high-risk, high-needs drug offenders. And that has been some of the most meaningful work that I've done in my work here. And I serve on a specialty court. I was the chief judge on a specialty court. I'm now a panel member called the Commitment Appeals Panel. It is a specialty court established by the Minnesota Supreme Court, and we handle the sex offender cases. And so that's the court that I'm working with most often now. And I'm still doing, it will be very interesting to see what happens when we come back on the other side post-pandemic and start opening up the courts for in-person hearings, because I have a feeling I'll be working a fair amount on mass calendars, getting things going. But my specialty became drugs, addiction, and sex offenders. So how did a nice girl like me get to a place like this?
Wow.
That's all important work. Good for
It
you.
is, yeah,
And it's very
yeah. It
emotional.
was very, very, very satisfying work.
Yeah.
Very satisfying work.
Thanks, Chris Ann. Any other questions?
Karen, this is Stephanie.
Hi,
Thank you
Stephanie.
so much. This is just wonderful.
Hi, Sam. Nice to see you.
Hi.
Karen, the friends that your friendships and friends in Kosovo, how is life for them today?
My friends in Kosovo, my Albanian friends are all in their 30s. They're married, they have young families, they're very, very busy with families. They struggle in terms of economic security, but please understand that the family structure in Kosovo is, as it is in most places in the world, a multi-generational family structure. So families live, grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, the children, they live in 3 or 4 generation families, and they support each other as extended families in the same home. And the way the homes are designed, the architecture is completely different. In the single family house, it will have 3 or 4 stories so that each family can live in the same house, have their own floor in the same house. But the families live together and support each other.
Okay. And is it?
But Kosovo is not, it's not the poor, I think at one point it was the poorest country in Europe. I think Moldova has that status now. But it is near the bottom.
Okay.
But there's plenty of food. The food is bountiful, it's fresh, it's good. There is housing. They may live in close quarters, but it's not a wealthy country, that's for sure.
Okay. And then the religious split, the religions there, Muslim and Christian, are they living well together? Is it
What has happened? I mean, on my staff, I mean, we had Christian and Muslim. I mean, we had interpreters. We had Serbian staff. We had Albanian staff. And in this part of the world, people have coexisted and lived side by side for millennia, and have traded and worked and lived with their neighbors in villages, in small villages, for eons of time. The political boundaries don't work so well, and we see this all over the world, that when you have political boundaries superimposed, it doesn't necessarily work. And so you have Serbian enclaves in Kosovo, and I think that things are much, much, much calmer now. In the north, there is an area in the north of Kosovo that is primarily Serbian.
Thank you.
Karen,
There
what
are
is on
large
your,
Albanian. There's a large Albanian minority, 25% in Macedonia. Macedonia is Orthodox, and but there is a very large Albanian 25% minority. But there is political tension in Macedonia over that.
Thank you.
Karen, what is on your wish list for travel yet?
Well,
gonna ask
right now I'm supposed to be in Israel.
Oh,
Yeah, I feel really lucky. I was able to go to Thailand, Cambodia, Laos in January for 3 weeks. And then we were in Texas and Mexico for the month of February. And then when we got home, about March 6th, of course, the world changed dramatically. And so thus far, Greg White and I have foregone a trip to Barcelona. We were supposed to be in Barcelona in March. That didn't come to pass. My husband and I had a trip to Israel and Jordan, a 3-week trip to Israel and Jordan that we're supposed to be on right now. And we've got a trip to the Balkans in October. So I hope we can go. I'm thinking we probably won't be able to go, maybe not be able to get on a plane quite so soon. But I do have a long list, and I definitely want to, my husband has not been to sub-Saharan Africa, and I definitely want to go, and for him to see some of the big game and some of the big the big animals in sub-Saharan
please
Africa.
say, John.
And I have not been to Australia and New Zealand, and that's high on my list. I don't think I'm going to make it to Antarctica. I don't know that I'll be able to get to all 7 continents. I don't know about Antarctica.
You never know, Karen. There's always.
You never know.
You never.
You never know. It has been a goal to get to all 7 continents. So.
Well, talk to John about Tanzania in March.
Yeah,
Oh.
Vicky and Lee and I were supposed to be on a Rotary group trip to Tanzania that got canceled as a result of.
But March 2021.
But next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that with Sam? Is Sam Dalal involved in that? Do you know Sam? Yeah. Sam. I traveled to India with Sam.
Oh.
Yeah.
I think he runs the friendship exchanges for 5950.
Yeah. That was my tour of latrines.
Yeah.
Yeah. We cut ribbons. We even cut ribbons at some of the latrines. So that was a that was a great experience.
Cool.
Any other questions?
Paul had said something in chat about you're speaking to the Rotary Club in Hastings. Have you had that opportunity?
I have not spoken to the Rotary Club in Hastings. I have spoken to other Rotary Clubs. I've spoken in Apple Valley and in Burnsville and in Shoreview, but I have not spoken in Hastings.
Well, you're a great speaker, and you would be, I mean, anyone would be
What a-
thrilled to have you, that's for sure. We certainly are. This has been just,
Thank you.
it's been really delightful. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. This is Georgia. I've been listening, and I thank you too. This was just fabulous. I'm glad I was told by one of my children to come. So
Well,
it was
I am
fabulous.
so glad. I'm so glad to meet you. I've known your daughters,
Yeah.
and it is such
That's
a
her
pleasure
sister
to
over there,
meet you.
Stephanie.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah. Rotary's been wonderful for our family. So
Yeah.
I'm thrilled. Anyway, you're fascinating. You are definitely a citizen of the world.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you understand it too. That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a lot to learn, isn't there?
Yeah, there definitely is.
Mhm.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
We end our meetings with the Rotary four-way test. So if we can all unmute ourselves, and our eClub tradition is to say this together. So the Rotary four-way test of the things that we think, say, and do. Is it the truth?
Is it the truth?
Is
Is
it
it fair to all concerned?
Will
Will
it
it
build
Build goodwill and better
Better
friendships.
friendships,
Will it be
be
beneficial?
beneficial to all concerned.
I just would like to thank you again for being here, Karin. Just really, really a delight. I didn't know you. I didn't know your story. I feel like I do now. It's just really nice, and especially in this time when we are all, restricted in where we're going and what we're doing. It's nice to get a little travel guide over to part of Europe that many of us have not been to. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Karen, very much.
Thanks.